I've been listening to you all morning.
Yeah. I don't know. My coworkers are ready to fire me quick. They're tired of hearing my voice.
8:40, I think 8:40. It's on the front side.
Yeah, we've been around.
On the front side, maybe by way of telephone. Would you like a water?
Have you all right? Okay. Thanks, sir. got a leaner. Thank you. You're experienced. No, it's not gonna. He'll be ready. We'll work it. I'll put it down here. We'll have him keep the. But if I start gasping, just move it on Pat. So I think they're all that way. So a little something extra in there. You ready to go, partner?
Yes, sir.
Let's pull the mic up a little closely. More closely. Happy Kentucky Oaks Day, everyone. Happy Kentucky Derby weekend. I'm John Asher, Vice President of Racing Communications at Churchill Downs, and the man next to me. You know, we're known for the Twin Spires here at Churchill Downs. Should we ever construct a third one, it will look like this guy. Pat Day, the all-time leading rider at Churchill Downs, Racing Hall of Famer, and has won so many great races around this country in a career that now, how long has it been now, Pat, since you gave up your life in the saddle?
Going on 11 years.
11 years, pull that a little bit closer. So Pat's 11 years, more than 20 Derby mounts. Out of those, a very, very special Derby mount 25 years ago. We're celebrating the anniversary of his lone Kentucky Derby victory aboard Lil E. We're going to talk a bit more about that, but first, aside from the fact that he lives here in Louisville and is a wonderful part of our community, Pat's here for a reason. I want to get to that just in a second. But first of all, for those of you who are looking toward tomorrow's Kentucky Derby, we have had the official scratch time for the Run for the Roses. And we do have the two also eligibles have been scratched from Kentucky Derby 143. Number 21, Royal Mo, and number 22, Master Plan. They were the also eligibles. Had anyone scratched from the body of the race by 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, one of those who would have had the opportunity to draw in and compete, but all 20 stayed put. Not a great surprise there. And so we wish the best to the connections of Royal Mo and Master Plan and wish them well down the road. But they will not be competing in this year's Kentucky Derby. Before we get to Pat and reminiscing about his Kentucky Derby 25 years ago, you're here with, along with, again, being a member of this community, as you have been for many, many years, and a part of this scene on Kentucky Derby. You have some professional duties as well, and part of that is your relationship with Derby Experiences. And tell us a bit about what you're doing with this fine group.
Well, Derby Experiences is within the Quint Events, and Quint Events, as I understand it, they do this at all the major sporting events around the country, and they have gotten a block of tickets from Churchill Downs at all various price ranges, and they put together packages called the Derby Experience. And so what I get to do, and believe me, it's a joy because I love people, and I love talking about the great sport of horse racing. But what I'll do throughout Oaks Day and Derby Day is I will move from venue to venue, spending about 45 minutes to an hour in each one throughout the facility, meeting and greeting the fans and taking pictures and signing autographs and talking about the great sport of horse racing, and specifically about the Kentucky Derby, the greatest race ever. Yeah,
he's listed on the sheet describing his duties as a celebrity handicapper, but we just say it's Pat Day of Pat Day fame. That pretty much gets it done here in this community, being such a part of the Kentucky Derby.
I don't think I can live up to the billing of handicapper. I'm 1 for 22, John. 1 for 22.
Well, our record, you're sitting with the right man. I'm right here with you. So, but we're going to get to that 1 for 22 part now. So, again, your experience, those of you who know the story of Pat Day, will fill you in a little bit on the backstory. Pat came from Brush, Colorado. A high school wrestler, ladies and gentlemen, a wrestler in the High School Wrestling Hall of Fame, among your many honors through the years. But at some point, you decided that Olympic gold was not in your future, and you looked toward horse racing.
Well, I looked toward horse racing after I was a failure in the rodeo arena trying to be a bull rider. Mm-hmm. What that done for me was got me in front of people that knew about the great sport of horse racing, which I had a very limited amount of knowledge. I had heard of the Kentucky Derby, Bill Shoemaker, and Eddie Arcaro, and that was the extent of my knowledge. So when they inquired or suggested that I should be a jockey, I knew nothing about it, but it was a great fit, perfect fit. I believe I was tailor-made to be a jockey. I think God blessed me with tremendous talent and ability. And I believe really at that point in time, God was directing my footsteps. Got introduced to the great sport of horse racing almost immediately, met with significant success, tried to self-destruct for a number of years, and then in '84 I came to the knowledge of the saving grace of Jesus Christ, got set free from a lifestyle of drugs and alcohol and assorted living, and recognized that I'd been gifted with talent and ability and opportunities, and for the next 22 years endeavored to do the best that I could, looking forward to opportunities to give him the praise, the honor, and the glory. And it was a glorious 22 years, highlighted by the Derby in 1992 aboard Lil E.
In your career here, again, you're the all-time leading rider at Churchill Downs, the historic track here. You have basically lapped number 2 on that list. It'll be a long, long time before anybody ever catches you there. Your record, again, you're a member of Thoroughbred Racing's Hall of Fame, one of the all-time leading winners in the Breeders' Cup World Championships, and the list of fabulous horses you've ridden through the years is really, really a magical and wonderful thing. I have known you. My first Kentucky Derby was 1982 as a young reporter in this town. I didn't join Churchill Downs until 21 years ago. This is my 21st Derby coming up here. But all the time that I had the great opportunity to have first met you, covered you, and then gotten to know you over the years, during that riding career, you talked about the Derby, and it took a while for your magic moment on Derby Day to come along, but you always said I really believe there's a Derby out there with my name on it. Maybe several of them, but I believe there's one with my name on it. But your patience did get tested a little bit getting to that magic moment 25 years ago.
Well, I had had the distinct privilege of running second in that storied race. Not once, not twice, but 3 years in a row. And good horses, but just weren't meant to win the Derby. And certainly applaud the winners in those races. Winning Colors beat 49er the first year, and Sunday Silence beat Easy Goer the next year. It was a day somewhat like this, a muddy racetrack. Easy Goer just didn't care for the footing. And then Unbridled beat Summer Squall. And I couldn't have been happier for Mrs. Ginter, who was 92 or 93, I believe, at the time, and had been in the business for many, many years, and just to see her get this storied race, I was happy for her. Obviously disappointed for myself and Summer Squall and his connections, but certainly happy for her. And then to collaborate in 1992 aboard Lil E for Mr. Kel Partee and my dear, dear friend, Mr. Lynn Whiting, who just passed away about 10 days ago, a week ago last Wednesday. And it's a little bittersweet, to say the least. We look forward to celebrating the 25th anniversary together, and I know he's here in spirit. He fought hard to get back to the barn. He was able to come out a couple of days after a lengthy time in the hospital before he passed away on that Wednesday morning.
Let's talk a bit about the 3 horses you just mentioned, that string of those 3 runner-up finishes. Those were all wonderful horses.
Yes, sir.
Great careers.
Easy Goer was the best I ever rode.
Absolutely.
He was the best.
And I don't think anybody who ever saw him run would dispute that and talk about his accomplishments and his Hall of Fame career. But again, here's Pat Day, the dominant rider at Churchill Downs on 3 horses of this quality. Just shows you how difficult it is to win a Kentucky Derby. What were the lessons that you were learning during that frustrating stretch, and knowing that these horses were wonderfully talented horses, maybe great horses, and it wasn't enough still on the day? Well,
just perseverance. You've just got to persevere. And of course, 49er, there was a little question about him getting a mile and a quarter, Mr. Prospector, and so we rode conservatively early in the race. When I come off the turn that day, put him to the task. Winning Colors had made all the race that day. She'd made all the pace, and I closed up a ton of ground on her immediately, and I thought, I'm going to run right by her. And when I got to her, she had a big heart. She was very competitive, and I wasn't able to get by her. She held me off. It was a diminishing neck. As I said, Easy Goer caught a racetrack that he'd gotten beat as a 2-year-old on this racetrack.
6 months earlier, Breeders' Cup Juvenile, same situation, same type of racetrack, and
off
was
racetrack
beaten that day.
And ran second, and then came back, and he ran brilliant in the Preakness and ran the second fastest time ever in the Belmont. But then the next year, Summer Squall and Unbridled. Summer Squall made his way through the field nicely. When he inherited just drew me to the lead coming to the top of the stretch. And I thought it wasn't a question of win or lose at that point. I thought it was a question of how far I want to win by. I felt that anytime I pushed the button that he would just respond. And he gave me a little stutter step. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but I felt it, just a little hesitation. Kind of come out of the bridle a little bit. And about that time, Unbridled went by me with Craig Perrett. And don't get me wrong, Unbridled was a great horse and well trained by Carl Nafsker. He went on by me, and Summer Squall went back at him, and then he kind of floated. And then he'd go back at him, and he'd float a little bit. He just didn't stay to the task. And I wondered what in the world was going on with him. When I got home that night and watched a rerun of the race, at that very point that Summer Squall gave me that stutter step, Mike Battaglia said, and it's Summer Squall in front, and 150,000 people let out this huge roar that just continued to grow in noise, and it broke his concentration. And he never did, he would run a little bit, and then he would go, wow, look at this. And then he would run a little bit, and then he would, oh, man. And he just never got back in never got back in the bridle.
Talk a little bit about that aspect of riding in Kentucky Derby. Again, you had 22 times you had this, and you had different horses, different personalities, but the sensations are nothing you could really prepare them for. As you said, a crowd of 150,000, then now it's in the neighborhood of 170,000. You've got the infield with 70,000 people. You've got the noise comes crashing down from both sides. You've got 20 horses in the race, a distance you've never been before. The entire week leading up, until you get to the day of the race itself, you really don't know how they're going to react, do you?
No, and you really don't until you get into the race, just like that. Summer Squall was a professional. He was a fighter. He loved to be in the thick of it. He ran a brilliant race as a 2-year-old in the Hopeful in New York, and got bounced around and banged around. He just pinned his ears and kept fighting, and that was just totally unexpected. He'd always been very professional. I tried after I realized that that's what happened. In speaking with reporters, I tried to express to them or explain to them what had happened, and that was back in the days of the Walkman radios. You remember, you put your earphones on, and I said, imagine if you would that you were sitting there in the process, you're writing your article, you've got your Walkman radio on, and somebody sneaks up behind you, and they all of a sudden just run the volume through the roof. Boom, blows your concentration. Now, if they turn the volume back down immediately, how long does it take you to get your train of thought back where you were when that happened? And I could, when I was sharing that with the reporters, I could see that the gears were turning, and they were thinking about that. And I said, but with Summer Squall, they never turned the sound down. The further we went, the louder it got, and I kept him covered up in the Preakness. Mm-hmm. I kept him buried down inside of horses, kept his attention, and he handed it to Unbridled. And I really believed that he was the better of the two. But that day, it was meant that Mrs. Ginter should win. And as I said, I got back in the jocks room that day in time to watch a rerun of the race. And many of you might recall that Carl Nafsker was wired for sound, and Mrs. Ginter, 92 or 93, whatever she was, and she didn't see real well. Her glasses looked like the bottom of Coke bottles. She had her little derby cap on, and she was standing there like this, and she's looking this way. And Carl's watching the race and calling it to her, and he's got his binoculars. The field is over here, and he's calling a race to her. And I'm watching a rerun of this. And when Unbridled went under the wire, Carl said, Mrs. Ginter, you won the Derby. I love you, and gave her a big hug. I started crying. I just got beat, just ran second in the greatest race ever, and I'm crying for Mrs. Ginter. It was just, it's just an experience that you have to experience it to really appreciate it. I hadn't at that point, but I could certainly see the joy in her face and was happy for her.
All right, let's get to the one that finally got you through and finally enabled you to see what those roses smell like in that winner's circle on the first Saturday in May, and that's WC Party's Lil E. Now, Lynn Whiting, the trainer we've talked about, trained here at Churchill, the son of a trainer, and a trainer and jockey. His father, Lyle, was in the business all of his life, and Lynn grew up in it. And I think those of us who knew Lynn regarded him as a horseman of the highest caliber. Mm-hmm. If anybody could look at a horse and look at the his coat, or look at how he looked in the eye, or how his head was hanging, and tell you instantly whether something was amiss or whether something was great, it was Lynn. He was terrific, especially at that part of his career, and going out and looking for new racing prospects and young horses. And he got a taste of the Kentucky Derby just a few years earlier with a horse named At the Threshold. And Lynn told me on several occasions after that, he said, I finally figured out, he said, I really never thought I had a chance to win a Derby until I had At the Threshold. He finished third in the Derby. And ironically, just a few years later, out there getting ready to purchase horses, he purchased a son of At the Threshold named Lil E, Pennsylvania bred, and brought him here. And you ended up in the saddle aboard Lil E. And you had many, many wins with Lynn Whiting and Mr. Partee over the years. But at any point, as when you first saw this colt, at 2 years old and moving around in 3, even though he was an outstanding 3-year-old, were you thinking this was the horse that might help you break through?
Well, you always hope that, and certainly Mr. Partee's his goal in life was to win the Derby. He wanted to buy horses that were somewhat proven. He didn't like to buy young horses that going through the sales ring, yearlings, and they might be well bred and have a great future. But he wanted to get horses that had proven themselves somewhat. Little E.T. had done that, and Mr. Whiting had approached whoever it was that they bought him from, and subsequently they got him late in the 2-year-old season. I rode him every time after that, and he was a horse with tremendous talent. Initially he was a bit on the aggressive side. He didn't want to settle nicely. He wanted to kind of jump in the bridle and run off with us. And I don't remember what race it was in Hot Springs. His 3-year-old season, we sort of took him to school. We drug him back off the leaders and made him stay down in there. And as I recall, he won. But he learned his lesson well. Then he come back in the Jim Beam, I believe it was, at Turfway.
At Turfway Park.
And he won that race. And he came back and he ran second in the Arkansas Derby. But I felt like he was coming into the race in good shape and in the right way. And, of course, I had the utmost respect for Lynn. He was not a self-promoter. Had he been, he probably would have gotten many more opportunities. But he let his work do his talking for him. And he felt that Lil E had a better than average chance to upset the apple cart that afternoon. As you recall, there was a horse called the Rozzy.
Yeah, let me set the stage on this Derby a little bit, because it was being a real, what I think we would call here in Louisville, a hometown victory with you and Lynn Whiting, who spent his career here, and Mr. Partee, who was such a fixture here. But that Derby field was perhaps the most international of Derby fields. And you mentioned Arazi, who 6 months earlier had won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile here at Churchill Downs, one of the most mesmerizing performances anyone around here had ever seen. He looked like a super horse that day, and came back, had a little bit of an eventful winter, but came back and was a big favorite for the Derby. French star trained by Francois Poutin. And so there's your Derby favorite. You also that year had a horse named Dr. Devious, who had been purchased by Sid and Jenny Craig that year. And he was a British horse and would not win the Kentucky Derby, but would essentially use the Kentucky Derby as a prep for the Epsom Derby. His next start, he went back to England, won the Epsom Derby, and something had never been done in the history of the Kentucky Derby. And there was an Irish horse named Fire, who was very, very promising. So you had 3 international stars. I think that was also the year of A.P. Indy, who was a wonderful horse, but he scratched the morning of the race. But you were an outsider in this field where it looked like it was the year maybe that the Kentucky Derby was going to be a breakthrough as an international event, and here you were on the local horse that day. But you knew you had seen Arazi the year before, and you certainly heard talk about him over the 6 months during that period. What were your thoughts going into that Derby day, and then just kind of take us through the race, if you would?
Well, my thoughts were the same as they were every year. If you're in them, you can win them. And I think we've seen that play out with Mind That Bird and others. It's whoever steps up to the plate on that given day. So I was going in optimistically. Lynn was expecting a big effort. That was good enough for me. He said he'd trained well up to the race, was doing good. And, you go in thinking if you're in them, you can win them. You're going to give it your best shot, hope that you get the breaks in the race, and ultimately get the victory. And I felt real good. My horse got the first call away from the gate, broke well, and then settled nicely, which was a pleasant, not a pleasant surprise. I felt that when we'd taken him to school, he learned his lesson well. He settled nicely going into the first turn. Chrissy Roach on the Irish horse kind of wheeled out in front of me just as we got into the turn, had to steady a little bit. But then he got back into stride quickly, and we were moving nice up the backside. But at the half-mile pole, Arazi, who had gone by me in the juvenile the same way at the same point, he went by me on the outside with Patrick Valenzuela, and it looked like Patrick had a ton of horse. And when he went by me with his feet in the dashboard, I thought, at the very best, I'm running for second money. I expected him to just keep running. And so when he went by me, I eased out from behind horses, started to follow him around the turn, and much to my surprise, he opened up about 4 or 5 and then just stayed there. He didn't just keep running away from me. which made me feel pretty good. And then I'm watching Patrick pretty closely, and I guess inside the 5/16 pole, I seen Patrick kind of give him a shove, and he got no response. And I immediately thought, he's done. He didn't just accelerate and run away from me. And so I felt like I had him, and I looked down the racetrack, casual eyes, with Gary Stevens was just going to lead. Dance floor was down on the fence. He'd made the lead, and with Chris Antley, but he was starting to falter. And I hadn't really put Lil E to the task yet. I felt like, boy, this is, I asked him, he dropped down, he accelerated, and come to the 8th pole, I said, unless there's a Silky Sullivan behind me, that's going to catch me in the final strides, I'm going to win the race. And it was just the most unbelievable feeling that I'd ever experienced in racing. It was a feeling that when I went to the lead, it was a feeling that started way down deep in the pit of my stomach and just continued to grow as we got closer to the finish line. And when we crossed the finish line in front, that feeling was just second to none. It was just, I think the only thing better than winning it once would be to win it twice. I never got that accomplished. I tried 11 or 12 more times and didn't get the job done, but that experience was certainly the highlight of my 32-year career.
Yeah. Do you remember when you came back to the winner's circle? It's a wonderful moment when the horse comes back around, and of course the crowd's cheering, and you and the horse. Do you remember seeing Lynn Whiting for the first time, or anything like that?
Oh, he was glowing.
Yeah, he
was glowing, and Mr. Partee, he was crying. He came up to shake my hand. I've got a big picture at home hanging on the wall that's kind of tells it all. I leaned out of the saddle and gave Mr. Partee a big hug, and we're both boo-hooing. I guess we're a bunch of crybabies, but it was it was tears of joy, to say the least.
I want to talk about another aspect of that scene, which had played out. Some of it had played out 24 hours earlier, and that was the early days of a tradition we had in which some Kentucky Derby jockeys would go to Corsair Children's Hospital and visit young patients there of all different ailments and severity of their ailments. And again, that was fairly early in that tradition. We now do it a little later in the meet. As Derby Day has just become so incredible, but at that part of Derby history, that was one of the things Pat was taking part in on Kentucky Oaks Day. So you go down there, you visit these young patients, talk to them and their parents. I've been down there on those trips with them. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience, and great to see the looks on those faces. But talk about, in particular, one patient you met that day, and how that meeting played out on Kentucky Derby Day.
Well, I got to tell you, I look forward to doing that on Oaks morning, because, as you know, everything gets fired up around here. Everybody gets excited, and it's almost, don't get me wrong now, this is not denigrating the Derby by any means, but we almost make it like a life and death situation. It becomes the all in all, and we get pretty caught up into that, and I wasn't unlike that. And so on Oaks morning, we'd make our way downtown and see these children that were really in a life and death struggle, and it helped me to get my feet back on the ground, get my priorities rearranged and set straight. That morning we went down there, and Corsair had, I called it a painter's cap, with Corsair Children's Hospital on it, and all of the jockeys had them, and they had some extras that we were signing and handing out to the kids, and we were wearing them and and so we're standing there in the hallway and between rooms, and a boy came by on a gurney. He'd had a treatment, battling for his life, and he was sicker than a dog before, and he was trying to lift his head and trying to be communicative, and my heart went out to him, and on a whim I just said, if I win this race tomorrow, I'm going to wear this cap for you and for all the children here and the folks at Corsair Children's Hospital. And it wasn't like Babe Ruth, all right, then I'm going to put it over the wall. It was not that. It was just like, if God should smile on me and allow me to win this race, I want you to know I'm thinking about you, and I'm going to wear this cap. Well, the next day, I totally forgot about it. I mean, I got back in the hype, if you can imagine that.
Had the cap with you in the jocks room, had it in your locker.
Yep, I had it, but I brought it back, and I had it there. But as the race approached, it slipped my mind. And Chuck Carolla, who was the manager of the Jockeys Guild, he grabbed it. And he knew he was going to be in the winner's circle, and maybe he knew something I didn't know. But he brought the cap with him. And so when we got back in the winner's circle, there was Chuck, and he waved the cap, and I was like, all right, yeah. And so I was able to take my helmet off and put the cap on, just a gentle reminder of the kids downtown that were really fighting for their lives, that we were thinking about them.
We're going to wait on this, too.
Yeah.
Let's wait, please.
Is there a flag here? I'd like to stand up.
We'll do it.
Right. Yeah, let's have some horse racing.
Well, that's a lovely natural break to that part of the story, because at that moment, Pat, when there's an iconic photo that was taken by Pat McDonough of the Courier-Journal of you jumping off of Lil E team. There, you're wearing Mr. Partey's silks, the signature orange with the white dots, and you've got the Children's Hospital cap there, and the photo of you, which is memorialized here on the racetrack in a sculpture in the paddock garden, is you with hands raised. And actually, the Courier-Journal that day, I remind them often on this, that the cut line underneath the photo that described the photo didn't quite get the message right. It mentioned that you were acknowledging the cheers of the crowd after that Kentucky Derby, but I thought it was a smaller crowd. You were, a big subject, but a smaller crowd you were acknowledging that day.
I was acknowledging a party of one. As I said, the feeling that I had was I went to the lead that day, started down the pit of my stomach. When we crossed the finish line, I couldn't stop myself. I just kept saying, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus." As I'd said, I believe that there was a derby out there somewhere with my name on it. If it had never come to pass, I was leaving that in the hands of the Lord. But just the fact that He allowed me the privilege, the blessing of having experienced that, I just couldn't stop thanking Him. And so when I got back and got on the ground, I just had to look up and say, "Thank you, Jesus," one more time. And Churchill Downs honored me unbelievably by erecting a statue like that in the Rose Garden after I retired in 2005. It's a tremendous honor.
Now, those of us who work around here are pretty much true believers in the Kentucky Derby and the magic that we see in this event, but this story, as great as it is, got better a few years ago, and I hadn't heard this second part of it. But it involves the visit to the hospital and an unexpected return to connect with one of the key players in that visit. And Pat told this story a few years ago, and I think it was a function that your wife, a charity function here, and Pat and I were doing an interview similar to this, and then Pat went on to the next chapter here. Talk about how that story came alive again for you just a few years later.
Well, a couple of years later on Oaks Day, again, we go down to the hospital, and a young man looking very good and healthy, and his mother came up to me in the hallway, and she said, you don't know him, you don't recognize him, do you? And I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't. Well, it happened to be the young man that had been on that gurney, and not only did he fight, but he won his battle against whatever that disease was that he was fighting, healthy as can be and doing very well. And I heard just the other day, he lives in Shelbyville. I'm going to endeavor to look him up here one of these days in the near future, but doing very well. And so we're rejoicing in his victory. Yeah.
Well, if you want a photo, we got a couple of spots where I think it'd be special for both of you here. So if you want to bring them out, we'll do that. But it's that part of the story just blew me away that night. The magic of the Kentucky Derby extended over those years, and what a special story that's become. And Pat, by the way, to those visits to the hospital, they're still done every meet. Again, the Oaks has grown, and it starts earlier in the day, and there's not that opportunity to get those jockeys down there early in the day anymore. but there is a day later in the meet, and Pat is there every year. Never fails to see
Well,
the young
it's
patients.
always a good time. Coach there does a wonderful job, and the patients there, young children that have only just begun to live and fighting for their lives. So we go down there and try to hand out little artifacts, little horses or whatever we can, but just to try to bring a little ray of sunshine into that hospital room at that time, and maybe brighten their day just for a moment.
All right, let's get back in the time machine again. Go back 25 years ago, and that Kentucky Derby victory, and think of what's happened since then. And does it seem like it could have been 25 years since that long-awaited moment finally happened? And what does it mean to you looking at it in the rearview mirror?
Well, it doesn't seem like 25 years by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know where the time has gone, but it doesn't seem like it's 25 years. It's a memory that is just bubbling on the surface and really is brought to the forefront, the 2 weeks leading up to the Derby and through the Derby, and which is great joy to recall and think about. But, now I'm retired going on 11 years. And when I look back over my career, and had a wonderful career, don't get me wrong, but when I look back over my career, there's one victory that stands out head and shoulders over all the others. There was others that were worth more money monetarily. There were other victories that certainly were more significant in my overall career as far as pushing it forward. But they all pale in comparison to the absolute thrill and joy of winning a race. That Derby is the one that stands out head and shoulders over all the rest, and will forever.
I've always loved it that in that Derby, which had the most international of fields, the greatest world reach for a Derby, that all you had to do was cross the racetrack and go to the first barn you saw. That was Lynn Whiting's barn, and the winner was right there. It really is a magical thing looking back on it.
And a couple of weeks after that, if you recall, the racing secretary at Turfway Park, and forgive me, his name escapes me.
Gary Wilford.
Yeah, Gary. Gary's a pretty good-sized man.
Had some heft.
And
yeah.
he told Lynn after we won the race at Turfway, he said, "If you win the Derby, I'll dance on the roof of your barn." And he was good to his word.
Yeah.
They built a little platform up there and lifting him up there with a forklift and put on some music, and he danced for us. It's just great.
It was magical.
Yes.
Only time I ever wanted to see him dance, so once was enough. But it was a great thing to see that happen. It really was.
I don't believe it got him an invitation to Dancing with the Stars.
I don't think so. But again, it was early. I mean, come later, who would have known? Who would have known? Let's talk just a little bit again about Lynn Whiting and his recent passing. Again, you couldn't find a greater horseman or anyone who loved horses more.
Greater horseman or a greater person.
Absolutely. But one of my favorite stories about that Derby, and we've talked about you, and Lynn was pretty soft-spoken guy. Good with a quip. I mean, he could hit you with a one-liner, but a lot of people didn't know that about him because he was so quiet. But and again, he celebrated the Derby that night. What did you just go out to dinner? What did you do that night when you?
No, they went to dinner. By the time I got back to the barn, everybody had left me.
Is that right?
So I got to go in the stall and hug on Lil E a little bit, and a friend of mine, Don Dunn, lived right here across the street, and so we went over there and it was a relatively quiet evening, but it was. I mean, I was floating.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that Lil E carried me the last eighth of a mile. I think I just floated.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, back to Lynn. Went out to dinner, but certainly nothing extravagant. Gets up the next morning, as always, right on time, heads in, does the same thing he always does. Stopped at a food store and went in to get a newspaper, cup of coffee. So he goes up, there's a woman there at the counter. She gives him the total. He hands her the money. She looks at it. Puts the money in the drawer, and then looks at it again, and she goes, "You won the Kentucky Derby, didn't you?" And Lynn says, again, Lynn's quiet, soft-spoken guy, but he said, yeah. He said, my shoulders went back a little bit, my chest puffed out, and he said, "Yes, ma'am, I did." And that was pretty much it. But then he said one of the greatest things, and I've never forgotten this moment. When he talked about that and that experience and everything since then. And he didn't win another Kentucky Derby. Ran in a couple, but never, and won some nice races afterwards, but that was the high point. He said, "I'll tell you one thing." He said, "That Kentucky Derby, it never washes off of you."
There you go. That's his one-liner, and he's absolutely true. Yeah. Absolutely true. He came to the barn the next morning like he always did, And the morning the Lord called him home, he was trying to get back to the barn. If he had his druthers, he'd have died in the shed row.
Yeah, I think he would have. But was trying to get back there.
Yes, sir, he was.
And you know, I think and he'd fought through the winter. We knew he had not done well.
Yeah.
But had fought to get back, and I think he had a golf cart to take him around back there. He'd already trained some horses and spent a couple of good days out there. So.
Well, they'd moved him from Baptist East to the Masonic Home for rehab, and at some point he told them, he said, I'm not going to spend my whole life in here. At which point they told him, you're here voluntarily. You're not under lock and key. We're trying to help you. You're here, you know, for your own good. And he immediately started making arrangements to get out. And Sarah, a girl that works for him, picked him up at the Masonic Home at 5:30 on Monday morning, brought him out to the barn. I'd seen him on Saturday before that, and when I heard he was at the barn, I immediately ran by the barn. And of course, by that time it was 10:15 or 10:20 or something. He was waiting for his wife to come pick him up, and there he stood, weaker than a kitten, and barely able to stand up. But he had a twinkle in his eye as he looked down the shed row. And he told me that story. He said, "I told him I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in the Masonic Home." And so then Scooter Dickey, a dear friend and good trainer, and lives next to him. So he brought him out on Tuesday morning. And Tuesday night, Nell told me, she said, you know, I told him, Lynn, you don't need to go to the barn in the morning. Why don't you just stay in? He said, no. He said, I'm going out to the barn. And so 4:30 Wednesday morning, he got up and was trying to get ready to go. Nell, his wife, had gotten up and made him some coffee. And as I understand it, he was walking with a walker. He was too weak to walk on his own, but he was making his way across the floor, and whether he tripped or just collapsed, he fell to the floor, and she ran over and held him, and he was having a hard time catching his breath. And she said, just settle down. We'll get you back up. And he took a couple of deep breaths and went home.
Yeah. Well, I know on Derby Day we'll be thinking of him, and you know, those of us who knew him, respected him, loved him, will be thinking of him, and maybe it'll be something more outward. Because I remember when Mr. Partee passed, the day we got the news that Mr. Partee had died. It was a Sunday, as I recall, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but this is my recollection. It was a Sunday. There were 3 horses connected to W.C. Partee in that day. 2 of them carrying the orange silks with the white dots, his silks. And another, I think, was maybe an offspring of Lil E. All 3 of them won that day. And you know, the people who knew him, I remember we all looked at each other and said, well, he's gone, but he didn't go far. He's with us. So again, I don't know if we'll feel anything like that. I know we'll be feeling it tomorrow, and we'll be feeling feeling the presence of both Lynn and Mr. Partee. But and I can only imagine what you'll be thinking, and just and what it's meant to you over these 25 years.
Well, it's extra special. It would have been special to win it for anybody, but to do it with Mr. Partee and Mr. Whiting, to collaborate with that team and fine gentlemen, great men, and just to be a part of that team was certainly added to it significantly.
We're going to see if anybody else got a question. I know we've gone on, but I love hearing Pat tell this story so much. I just don't want him to stop. And Pat, again, not only one of the great figures in the history of this historic racetrack and our industry, but again, that story and this anniversary, it's a really special thing. We're glad you're with us, and we appreciate everything, and appreciate the role you continue to play here. And I know the folks are going to benefit over these next 2 days with that handicapping ability of yours, with the Quid Events Derby experiences. But just having the opportunity to see some folks and talk about your career is a wonderful thing. So we have a question back here.
When you have weather like it is today, what does that do for you guys? Kind of walk me through what that's like from your point of view.
Well, obviously it takes a little bit of the luster away, but you know, you can't diminish the thrill of being here for the Oaks and the Derby. As far as preparation, obviously we'll carry more goggles, try to make arrangements to do the best that you can out there and be as well prepared as you can. And it's a bit tough on the valets that they have to clean all the equipment up every time it goes back out. Fortunately, there's a significant amount of time between races that gives them a chance to do that. But Churchill Downs, it handles water incredibly well. Probably one of the best racetracks in the world with regards to the way it handles, and they've squeezed the racetrack, they've sealed the racetrack. It'll have a little water on top, but horses will be getting a good hold of it. It'll be a good, safe racetrack, and it never has a bias when it's like that. You know, you inside, outside, doesn't matter where you're at. You've got a good racetrack. So all these riders are professional and praying for a day of a couple of good days of safety, safe racing, safe activities with no injuries or accidents, and may we all make it safely through the weekend and have some good racing.
Back here.
Pat, you didn't only win the Derby, you won a state-of-the-art automobile, a 1993 Chrysler Concorde. I was curious if you still have that car with you.
No, sir. No, sir, I don't still have that car. That was when Chrysler was promoting, endorsing the race, and I've gotten a couple of cars from them. One I kept for a good while, and I gave it to a friend of mine. I don't have any of them anymore. You know, on the road to the Derby, I don't know if you noticed that chunk of that ring.
The ring, the Derby ring.
I just got that last week. Darren Moore, who designed it and made it, he sells jewelry over here in the gift shop. In 2014, I happened to walk by the gift shop, and I was with Quint Events. I was going from one venue to the next, and he looked out and seen me, and he thought, boy, I'd like to meet him someday. But he knew, you know, Derby Day with all the activities, there was no chance. And so the next day, Sunday, went to a restaurant out in Middletown called Wild Egg. And him and his wife went there for breakfast. My wife and I went there for breakfast. And it was a long line, as you can imagine, Sunday morning. And so we went in, put her name on the list, and got the little thing, you know, where they can let you know when it's your turn, and walked back outside. Beautiful day. There's a little grassy area in a tree across the parking lot there, and a guy was sitting underneath the tree, and I said, I'm going to go sit in that grass and relax until they call our name. And so I walked over there and asked the gentleman, I said, is this seat taken? He said, no, have a seat. It happened to be Mr. Moore. And so we talked. He's a strong Christian, so we had a good talk about our faith and our walk with the Lord. And at some point, he became aware of the fact that I didn't have a, quote, Derby ring. I'm not really big into jewelry. I could have and should have probably at some point gotten one, but I hadn't. And he never said any more about it. Well, this year being the 25th anniversary, he took it upon himself, him and his wife and their company, to design and to make me this ring. And last Sunday in a special ceremony here at the Derby Museum, he presented me with the ring. And if you can see it, it's oval in shape, signifying the racetrack. Got the horseshoe, of course, the horses. Got a rose in the middle, the Derby. You got Mr. Partey's colors and Lil E on one side and Twin Spires on the other. And I can't get it off. It's a little tight. But if you looked inside, there's a cross, and it's all held together by the cross of Christ, which is the core of my belief that because of the cross of Christ, we receive the forgiveness of our sins, have the promise of eternal life.
Well, it all came together for you 25 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Tomorrow on Derby Day. Another one back here. Where are we?
We'll just have one more. Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to ask Pat, the enormous pressure for first-time jockeys in the Kentucky Derby. Over the years, jocks don't want to blow it for the owners and for the trainers. Advice that you've given over the years to those in their first derbies, or maybe still getting through it, that you've offered or about that subject?
Well, what I would strongly suggest to them is just bottom line, it's just another race. Yeah, there's 20 horses. Yeah, it's a mile and a quarter. Yes, it's a Derby. It's a special race. But as they prepare to go into each race today, up to and through the Oaks, and all day tomorrow, up to and through the Derby, there's a number of other races on the card, and they approach each race with the same professionalism. Now, first-time rider in the Derby, what I would say is hang on at the conclusion of my old Kentucky home, because 150, 60, 70,000 people let out a strong roar. So don't let that catch you by surprise. The first time I rode a horse called Music Leader, and I didn't know what to expect. And Music Leader was a bit of a long shot in the race. Obviously, wasn't a favorite, and so there wasn't the pressure of riding the favorite in the race. But we walked down, got out in the paddock. The atmosphere, you could cut it with a knife, as is usual. got on him, and he was very well-mannered. We made the parade, walked through the tunnel, out onto the racetrack, and they're playing My Old Kentucky Home. In the last course of that, everybody joins in because everybody knows the words. We no more, my lady. Well, what neither myself nor music leader realized was that at the conclusion of that race, everybody doesn't just sit down and shut up. To the contrary, they yay, and they let out a big hoop, and so I'm riding along. I'm a crybaby, okay? Bottom line, and I had a big lump in my throat, and tears are running down my cheeks, and I mean it was an emotional moment. And so we're walking along there. Music leaders like me, he's just taking it in. He's walking along nice, and when they went yay, he thought he needed to run for his life. He jumped straight in the air. Fortunately, the pony girl had a good hold of me, and he didn't get away, and I didn't fall off. That would have been a great way to start my endeavor in the Derby. But enjoy it, but be mindful. It's just another race, and do the best that you can. Don't try to overthink it. Do what you do.
Any other questions for Pat? We okay? Pat, we appreciate so much the time you take in here to tell the story that never gets old.
No, never.
After 25 years, we want to wish the best to your wife Sheila and your daughter Irene.
Thank you, John.
And we'll be thinking of Lynn Whiting, of course, and
his family,
his
yes,
wife
sir.
and daughters, and Mr. Partey's family.
Yeah.
I got a feeling we'll all feel the presence this weekend on this great anniversary, and appreciate what you continue to do for Churchill Downs and the Kentucky Derby. The folks at the Quint events, the Derby experiences will benefit from the experience of all your years and the 25 years since that magical moment. But it didn't wash off of Lynn Whiting. I don't think it's going to wash off of you either. So.
No, I don't believe so. You know, it's again, I appreciate the opportunity with Quint events to get up close and personal with the fans. And you know, if I had 3 lifetimes and spent every day trying to pay back to the great sport of horse racing, I would fall far short of what it's given to me and my family.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Good to have you here, pal. Ladies and gentlemen, Hall of Fame rider, Kentucky Derby winner, even greater person, Pat Day. Thanks for being with us. Happy Derby.
And you too. Let's all have a safe weekend.
Thanks, Bart.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Same here.
I think it's quit raining. It's supposed to ease out of here. Be good.
Whatever happens, it'll be all right.
Amen. Amen. No. Rain or shine. It will not dampen our spirits. Ah, that would be good. Well, I had an umbrella in the car, but you know they won't let me.
We'll let them in. Not even you. If
Well,
we gave you one, we're not going to let that.
I wouldn't even try.
Randy and Shirley used to just Oh, you drive it.